The air in the Coronado mess hall was thick with the smell of fried chicken, bleached linoleum, and the unsettled testosterone of men who ran toward gunfire for a living. It was a language Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma understood, even if she no longer spoke it. She moved through the line with the economy of motion that came from 30 years in the Navy, her tray a balanced equation of protein, carbs, and greens. Her face was a roadmap of that service, a thin, silvery scar cut through her left eyebrow, a relic of a C-130's hard landing in a place that wasn't on any public map. Her hands, square and capable, had faint chemical burns on the knuckles from a quartermaster job that involved more than just counting blankets. She was 52, her hair was pulled back in a severe gray-streaked bun, and her logistics insignia was faded on her collar. To the room, she was just another REMF, a rear echelon mother figure who'd shuffled papers long enough to make chief. She found an empty table in the corner, away from the boisterous clusters of SEALs and SWCC operators. The noise was a familiar symphony, the clatter of cutlery, the booming laughter, the endless good-natured insults that were the currency of camaraderie. She ate methodically, her focus on her food, her posture straight, a habit beaten into her at Great Lakes decades ago. The disruption started as a low murmur. A table of young seamen, fresh from A school and full of the unearned confidence that came with a fresh haircut and a new uniform, had made her their target. The ringleader was a kid named Miller, barely 20, with a chest puffed out like a pouter pigeon and the cruel smirk of a boy who'd never been properly humbled. "Look at Grandma over there," Miller said, his voice just loud enough to carry. "Probably remembers when the ships had sails." His friends snickered. Anya didn't look up. She speared a piece of broccoli with her fork, chewed, swallowed. Her pulse remained a steady, resting 60 beats per minute. She had heard worse from men who were far more dangerous. Miller, emboldened by her lack of reaction, pushed his chair back. "Hey, Chief, you lose your walker?" The laughter was louder this time. A few of the older petty officers at a nearby table glanced over, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and resignation. They knew the type. Miller was a problem waiting to happen, a lit fuse looking for a powder keg. Anya finished her broccoli. She placed her fork and knife neatly together on her plate, parallel, the way she'd been taught. She still did not acknowledge him. This, more than any retort, seemed to infuriate Miller. His authority, self-appointed as it was being ignored. He saw a small, old woman in a logistics uniform. He saw weakness. He saw an easy target to solidify his place in the chow hall pecking order. He swaggered over to her table, his two cronies trailing him like pilot fish. He leaned over, planting his meaty hands on her table, rattling her tray. "You deaf old lady, I'm talking to you." Anya finally lifted her head. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, met his. They were calm, unnervingly so. They held no fear, no anger, just a flat, dispassionate assessment. It was the look a geologist might give a rock before taking a hammer to it. "You have a question, Seaman?" Her voice was low, with a slight rasp. The directness caught him off guard for a second. "Yeah, I got a question. What's someone like you doing at a place like this? This is where warriors eat. You should be in a library somewhere, shushing people." "I'm eating my lunch," she said, her voice still perfectly level, "and you're interrupting it. Step away from my table." It was an order, delivered without heat but with an undeniable core of steel. Miller's face flushed a blotchy red. Humiliation warred with anger. He was being dismissed by a supply clerk, in front of his friends, in front of the whole damn mess hall. "You don't give me orders," he snarled, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a theatrical growl. "You're just a paper pusher, a bean counter. My guess is you haven't done a real push-up in 20 years. Anya's gaze didn't waver. "That would be a bad guess." Something in his brain snapped, the final thread of his pathetic self-control. He was going to put the old woman in her place. He was going to show everyone who was in charge. He balled his right hand into a clumsy, oversized fist. "I'll show you who gives orders," he spat and drew his arm back. He never saw the first sound. It wasn't loud. It was the scrape of a single chair leg on the linoleum floor. Across the room, at a table of SEALs from SDV Team 1, a mountain of a man with a thick beard and the call sign Axe had risen silently to his feet. He didn't say a word. He just stood. Then another chair scraped, and another. Like a silent, deadly wave, every single man wearing a trident stood up, one by one, table by table. The lean, wiry breachers, the hulking M60 gunners, the quiet, intense snipers, medics, communicators, team leaders, 40, maybe 50 of them. They rose in unison, a forest of muscle and quiet lethality. They turned as one to face Miller. The mess hall, which had been a cacophony of noise moments before, fell into a profound, suffocating silence. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. Miller's fist, halfway through its arc, froze in midair. His eyes widened, darting from one stony face to the next. He saw no anger in their expressions. He saw something far worse, a cold, absolute certainty. He had crossed a line he didn't even know existed. He had trespassed on holy ground. He slowly, shakily lowered his arm. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty white. His friends had already taken 2 steps back, trying to melt into the wallpaper. Anya Sharma hadn't moved. She hadn't flinched. She simply watched him, her pale eyes holding him in place. She took a slow sip of her water. Axe took 1 step forward. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "Miller." The seaman flinched as if struck. "Senior Chief, sit down," Axe commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Miller practically fell back into the nearest chair. Axe's eyes, hard as granite, swept over the young sailor. "You will finish your meal. Then you will report to Master Chief Thorne for remedial training on customs and courtesies. You will continue this training every day until he tells you that you finally understand what the word respect means. Is that clear?" "Yes, Senior Chief," Miller whispered, his eyes locked on his trembling hands. Axe then turned his gaze to Anya. The coldness vanished, replaced by a deep, unwavering deference. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Chief." Anya returned the nod, a slight, almost imperceptible inclination of her head. "Senior Chief." The tension broke. The SEALs sat back down in unison, the scraping of their chairs the only sound. The murmur of conversation slowly returned, but it was different now, subdued. Every eye in the room kept flicking toward the small woman in the corner, the quiet logistics chief who had, without raising her voice or a hand, commanded the unwavering loyalty of the most elite fighting force on the planet. Miller sat frozen, a pariah at his own table. Anya Sharma calmly picked up her fork and went back to her lunch. Her transfer to Coronado had been a source of consternation for Captain Eva Rostova, the base commander. Rostova was a product of the modern Navy, sharp, ambitious, with a political acumen that matched her strategic mind. She ran her base with the precision of a Swiss watch, and she did not like variables. Chief Petty Officer Sharma was a variable. "Let's be frank, Chief," Rostova had said on Anya's first day, her office a sterile testament to efficiency. Awards were perfectly aligned on the wall. Not a single pen was out of place on her vast mahogany desk. "Your file is an anomaly. 30 years of service, exemplary fitness reports, but your assignments are all over the map. Quartermaster on a sub-tender, logistics specialist for a naval construction battalion, a stint at the Pentagon that's so heavily redacted it's mostly black ink. And now you request a transfer here to NAB Coronado, the beating heart of naval special warfare. Why?" Anya sat opposite her, her back perfectly straight, her hands resting on her knees. She didn't fidget. "I was informed there was a need for a chief with my skill set in managing sensitive operational equipment, Captain." Rostova steepled her fingers, her gaze sharp and analytical. She saw the scar, the weathered skin, the faded uniform. She saw age. She saw a career coasting toward retirement. "With all due respect, Chief, we have the most advanced logistics system in the world. We have young, motivated sailors who are experts in RFID tracking, predictive analytics, and drone-based inventory. What skill set are you referring to exactly?" The dismissal was polite, professional, but unmistakable. "You are obsolete." "I know how things break, Captain," Anya replied, her voice even. "And I know how to fix them with what's on hand. I know the specific wear patterns on a 7.62 bathymeter feed tray after 10,000 rounds in a saline environment. I know how the new carbon fiber fin components react to sub-zero water. I know that the sealant on the new dry deck shelter hatches becomes brittle if exposed to prolonged UV radiation. I know the things the manuals don't tell you." Rostova was momentarily silent. It was an impressive, if esoteric, list. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Sharma was an anachronism, a relic being put out to pasture in a place that had no pasture. "Your duties for now will be straightforward, Chief," Rostova concluded, her tone shifting to one of finality. "You'll oversee the consolidated issue facility, parachutes, dive gear, demolitions kits. Make sure the inventory numbers match the requisitions. Master Chief Thorne is technically your superior, but he's focused on the operational side. You'll handle the paperwork. Keep the place organized. Understood?" "Yes, Captain," Anya said. The order was clear. She was being put in a warehouse, a glorified stock clerk, a gatekeeper for the real warriors. "Good. That will be all." Anya stood, rendered a crisp salute, and walked out of the pristine office, her face unreadable. She had been dismissed by officers before. She had been underestimated by operators before. It was a familiar posture, one she had learned to use to her advantage. Let them see the gray hair and the logistics badge. Let them see the quiet woman who kept to herself. It made it easier to do her work. And her real work had very little to do with counting parachutes. The CIF was a cavernous building, smelling of canvas, rubber, and gun oil. It was her sanctuary. Young sailors scurried about with checklists and scanners, their movements frantic and inefficient. Anya watched them for a day, silent, observing the flow, the choke points, the wasted energy. On the second day, she began to make changes. She didn't shout or issue grand proclamations. She moved a pallet rack here, rerouted a workflow there. She showed a young seaman how to properly coil a climbing rope to prevent kinks, her hands moving with a fluid, practiced grace. She taught another how to service the regulator on a rebreather, pointing out a tiny O-ring that was a common failure point the official maintenance checklist overlooked. The younger sailors initially treated her with the same casual condescension as Miller. They called her Chief Sharma to her face, but she heard the whispers, "The new old lady, the inventory warden." They would roll their eyes. When she insisted on a manual, hands-on inspection of every piece of kit scheduled for a training op, rather than just relying on the computer scan. "The scanner says it's good, Chief," a fresh-faced petty officer third class named Chen protested one afternoon, gesturing to a crate of climbing harnesses. Anya picked one up. Her fingers, calloused and sensitive, ran over the webbing, the stitching, the metal buckles. She paused at the main carabiner gate. She worked it open and closed, her head tilted slightly, listening. "No, it's not," she said quietly. She held it out. "Look at the spring. There's a hairline fracture. Under a heavy dynamic load like a fall, it would shatter." Chen squinted. He couldn't see it. Anya took a small tool from her pocket and applied a tiny amount of pressure. The metal spring snapped with a quiet tink. Chen's jaw dropped. The scanner had cleared it. The computer said it was fine. But the computer hadn't rappelled down a cliff face in a sandstorm. Anya had. The incident in the mess hall accelerated the shift in perception. The whispers about her stopped. The younger sailors now watched her with a mixture of fear and awe. They followed her instructions without question. The SEALs, when they came to draw gear, treated her with a reverence they usually reserved for their most senior master chiefs. They didn't ask her about her past. They didn't need to. They had seen all they needed to see in the quiet, unyielding support in her eyes and the silent, unanimous defense she had commanded. They knew she was one of them in a way that transcended rank or specialty. Captain Rostova heard about the mess hall incident, of course. She called Axe into her office. He gave her the bare, unvarnished facts. He didn't offer any explanation for why the teams had stood for Sharma. He didn't have to. It was a tribal matter, and Rostova, for all her intelligence, was not part of the tribe. She filed the incident away, another confusing data point in the anomaly that was Chief Anya Sharma. She was a problem to be managed, a piece on the board she didn't quite understand. And Captain Rostova did not like things she didn't understand. Her opportunity to solve the problem, she thought, came a month later. Operation Serpent's Coil, she announced in the sterile confines of the Tactical Operations Center. The room was filled with team leaders, intelligence analysts, and support staff. Anya stood in the back, near the wall, as was her custom. A full mission profile exercise, hostage rescue scenario on the gas rig platform Echo Lima, 70 miles offshore. Team 3, Bravo Platoon has the insertion via 2 high-speed RHIBs. They go in under cover of darkness, scale the platform, neutralize the OP-4, secure the hostage, and exfil before sunrise. Standard stuff. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. There's a new element, however. We're testing a new long-range comms package and a real-time biometric monitoring system for the operators. It's an R&D priority from the Pentagon. The system is finicky. Chief Sharma, she said, her voice singling Anya out. The room's attention shifted. Your file says you have experience with experimental signals gear from your time at Dahlgren. You'll go with them. Your job is to monitor the comms package on the command boat, make sure it stays linked to the TOC, and troubleshoot any issues. You are strictly in a support and observation role. Understood? It was a clever move. It put Sharma out of the way, on a boat in the middle of the ocean, where she couldn't disrupt the base's delicate social ecosystem. It utilized a line item from her file, making the assignment look logical on paper, and it placed her firmly in a non-combat technical role, reinforcing Rostova's perception of her. Understood, Captain, Anya said, her expression unchanging. Axe, who was standing near the front, caught her eye for a fraction of a second. He gave another one of his infinitesimal nods. He knew what Rostova was doing. Anya knew what Rostova was doing. But an order was an order. The night air was cold and damp, tasting of salt and diesel. The 2 rigid-hull inflatable boats sliced through the black water, their powerful engines a low growl against the vast emptiness of the Pacific. Anya was on the command boat, tucked into a small console near the coxswain. The boat was commanded by a young, capable lieutenant named Corrigan, Bravo Platoon's commander. He and his men treated her with professional courtesy, but a clear distance. She was the logistics chief, the tech support, an outsider to their tightly knit world. She focused on her screen. Green icons pulsed rhythmically, showing the biometric data of the 14 operators on the 2 boats: heart rate, core temperature, respiration. A separate window showed the signal strength of the new comms package. It was, as Rostova had predicted, finicky. The signal wavered, occasionally dropping out for a few seconds before reacquiring. "How's the new toy, Chief?" Corrigan asked, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. "The bandwidth is unstable," Anya reported, her voice calm and precise. "It's susceptible to atmospheric interference. The engineers who designed this have never been on the water at night." Corrigan grunted. "Figures. Just keep it running, Chief. We need that link." An hour out, the sea began to change. The long, gentle swells grew shorter, choppier. The wind picked up, whipping spray over the gunnels that felt like handfuls of icy gravel. The sky, which had been clear, was now obscured by a low, fast-moving blanket of clouds. "TOC, this is Bravo Lead," Corrigan said into his headset. "Weather is deteriorating. Over." The reply from the TOC, 70 miles away, was staticky. "Icery shows. Localized squall. Should pass quickly. Proceed with mission." Anya looked, from her screen to the churning water, then up at the bruised-looking sky. Her knuckles, the ones with the faint chemical burns, ached. They always ached when the barometer dropped hard and fast. This was no localized squall. This was something else. Something violent and wrong. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice cutting through the rising howl of the wind, "that forecast is wrong. We need to turn back." Corrigan glanced at her, his face tight with irritation. "The TOC gave us the go-ahead, Chief. We press on." He was young, ambitious, and this was his first command on a full mission profile. Aborting was not in his playbook. The first rogue wave came out of the darkness with no warning. It wasn't a swell. It was a vertical wall of black water that rose up and crashed down on them. The 30-foot RHIB was thrown sideways, groaning under the immense pressure. Men shouted, clinging to safety lines. The second boat, running parallel to them, was tossed into the air, landing with a sickening crunch that echoed even over the storm's roar. Anya's console exploded in a shower of sparks as the wave cascaded over it. The biometric and comms links winked out. Red error messages flashed across the screen before it went black. "We've lost the new comms," the boat's radio man yelled. "Trying standard SATCOM." Another wave hit, even bigger than the first. It slammed Lieutenant Corrigan against the boat's command console. He crumpled to the deck, a gash on his forehead, his eyes rolling back in his head. The coxswain fought the wheel, his knuckles white, but the boat's engine sputtered, choked with seawater, and died. They were dead in the water. The second boat had vanished into the screaming darkness. The platoon commander was unconscious. Their high-tech link to the world was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, began to creep into the air. The operators, trained for controlled violence and precise action, were now at the mercy of an enemy they couldn't shoot: the ocean. In the chaotic darkness, amidst the roaring wind and crashing waves, Anya Sharma moved. While the others were shouting, trying to assess the damage, she was already acting. Her first move was toward the unconscious lieutenant. Her hands, sure and steady, found his neck, checking for a pulse. Strong, but rapid. She ran her fingers over his skull, feeling for depressions. She peeled back an eyelid. Pupil response was sluggish. A serious concussion. "Doc!" she yelled over the wind, her voice a blade that cut through the noise. "Get over here. He needs to be stabilized. Keep his neck straight. Watch for vomiting." The platoon's medic, a young corpsman named Sandoval, scrambled over. He looked shaken, his eyes wide. Anya's calm, direct order seemed to ground him. He nodded, his training kicking in, and went to work on the lieutenant. Next, Anya moved to the dead console, her fingers probing the fried circuits by instinct. It was useless. Salt water had ruined it. "Radio man, what's the status of the SATCOM?" "No signal, Chief," the man shouted back, wrestling with his equipment. "The antenna must have been sheared off by that wave." They were blind, deaf, and adrift in a hurricane. The RHIB, without power, was turning broadside to the waves, threatening to capsize with every monstrous swell. "We need a sea anchor," Anya yelled to the platoon's senior NCO, a chief named Gant. "Now, or we'll roll." Gant, a seasoned operator, was already thinking the same thing. "What do we use?" "The spare gear bags and the emergency drogue chute. Lash them together with every spare line we have. We need to create drag and keep the bow pointed into the waves." It was a textbook answer, but Anya's commands were more than just textbook. They were immediate, precise, and delivered with an authority that left no room for doubt. The men who minutes before had seen her as a supernumerary technician now looked to her. Their officer was down, their comms were out. She was the one giving orders that made sense. They moved, uncoiling ropes, dragging heavy gear bags to the bow. Anya's eyes were constantly scanning the boat, the men, the waves. Her mind was a high-speed calculator processing 1,000 variables: wind speed, wave interval, boat integrity, the condition of the men. She saw the first signs of hypothermia in a young operator whose teeth were chattering uncontrollably. "You," she barked, pointing at him, "get next to him. Share body heat. Everyone, check the man next to you. We stay warm. We stay focused." She worked alongside them, her hands tying knots with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. She lashed the heavy bags together, creating a bulky, unwieldy mass. It wasn't elegant, but it would work. As Gant and 2 others prepared to deploy their makeshift sea anchor, she stopped them. "Wait," she said, pulling a chemical light stick from her own vest. She cracked it, and it flared with a ghostly green luminescence. She tied it securely to the sea anchor's main line with a complex, unfamiliar knot. "So we can track the line in the dark," Gant said, nodding in approval. "And so we know if it breaks," Anya corrected him. "Deploy it, slowly." They heaved the mass overboard. The line paid out, went taut, and the RHIB's violent rolling immediately lessened. It swung its bow into the oncoming waves, rising and falling with the swells instead of being swamped by them. It was a small victory, but it was the difference between surviving the next 10 minutes and not. For hours, they endured. The storm raged, a relentless assault of wind and water. Anya seemed to be everywhere at once. She directed the men to bail water using their helmets. She enforced a strict rotation, moving men from the exposed gunnels to the relative shelter of the center console to ward off hypothermia. She took inventory of their emergency. Supplies: 3 flares, 1 emergency beacon, 6 MREs, and about 10 liters of fresh water in various canteens. She was rationing the water when one of the operators, a kid named Jensen, started to lose it. "We're going to die out here. They don't even know where we are. The other boat. God, the other boat is gone." Anya moved to him, her steps sure on the pitching deck. She didn't slap him or shout him down. She knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. Her pale blue eyes were steady in the faint glow of the emergency lights. "Look at me, Jensen," she said, her voice low but firm, impossible to ignore. "Nobody is dying tonight. The storm will break by dawn. The current is pushing us southeast. Search and rescue will calculate a drift pattern based on our last known position. They'll start their grid search there. Our job is to be alive and visible when they get here. That's it. That's the whole mission now. You understand me?" Her certainty was absolute. It wasn't a guess, it was a calculation. She spoke of currents and drift patterns as if reading from a chart. Jensen, trembling, gave a jerky nod. "Good. Now drink this," she said, handing him her own canteen. "Then take a turn on the watch. I need your eyes." She had given him a task, a purpose. It was a masterful piece of crisis leadership, and Chief Gant, watching from the bow, felt a growing sense of awe. This was not a logistics chief. This was something else entirely. He looked at the knot she had tied on the sea anchor line, the intricate, efficient loops glowing faintly in the green light. He'd seen a knot like it before, a long time ago, in a dusty briefing room before a mission that had been officially denied. It was a variation of après-ski hitch, modified for extreme cold weather operations. Only one unit had used it. The storm began to break with the first hint of dawn. The wind lessened, the waves subsided, and the black sky softened to a bruised purple, then a sullen gray. The RHIB was a wreck. Gear was strewn everywhere. The men were exhausted, soaked, and freezing. But they were alive. The second boat was still missing. Anya scanned the horizon. The sea was still a mess of angry, white-capped waves. A helicopter search would be difficult. They needed to make themselves a bigger target. "The EPIRB," Gant said, referring to the emergency position indicating radio beacon. "We need to set it off." "Not yet," Anya said, her eyes narrowed in thought. "The signal is strong, but the battery life is finite. They'll be searching a wide area. We wait until we have a better chance of being seen." "Seen by what? There's nothing out here." "Look," Anya said, pointing to the east. A faint, dark line was just visible on the horizon. "That's a commercial shipping lane. It's about 5 miles out. The current is still pushing us that way. We wait until we're closer to it. A container ship's radar might pick us up, or we might get a visual. We fire a flare when a ship is in sight, then we trigger the beacon. It concentrates the search." Her logic was impeccable. It was a strategy born of patience and a deep understanding of maritime operations, things that had nothing to do with managing a warehouse. The men, now accustomed to her command, simply nodded and waited. An hour later, a massive container ship appeared as a tiny speck on the horizon. As it grew larger, Anya gave the order. "Flare up!" One of the operators fired a pencil flare. It shot into the gray sky, a streak of brilliant red against the clouds. They waited. 10 minutes later, they saw a distinct change in the ship's course. It was turning toward them. "Now," Anya said to the radio man, "activate the beacon." The effect was almost immediate. Within 30 minutes, the deep thump-thump-thump of a Navy Seahawk helicopter echoed through the air. It appeared out of the low clouds, a beautiful, welcome monster. A rescue swimmer dropped into the churning sea. The ordeal was over. As the last of Bravo platoon was being hoisted into the helicopter, Gant found himself next to Anya, waiting for their turn. The roar of the rotors was deafening, but he leaned in close and shouted in her ear. "That knot, Chief, on the sea anchor, where did you learn to tie it?" Anya's eyes met his. She didn't pretend not to understand. "A long time ago, from an old sailor." Gant shook his head, his face grim. "No, I've only ever seen one person tie a line that way. We were in a briefing at Dam Neck for a Tier 1 support op. The briefer was a ghost, no name, just a call sign. They said she wrote the book on unconventional infiltration and exfiltration, knew every current, every weather pattern, every equipment failure point from the Arctic to the South China Sea. They called her Kali. The name hung in the air between them, more powerful than the roar of the helicopter. Kali, the Hindu goddess of time, creation, and destruction, a name whispered in reverence and fear in the darkest corners of the special operations world. She wasn't a shooter. She was the one who made sure the shooters got home, the one who could build a radio from scrap, predict a storm from the ache in her bones, and hold a team of commandos together with nothing but her will. A legend. A myth. and she was standing right in front of him, her gray hair plastered to her head, looking like a tired old supply chief. Anya's expression didn't change. She simply held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and allowed the rescue swimmer to hook her into the hoist. As she was lifted into the sky, away from the wrecked boat and the angry sea, Gant knew. The file wasn't just redacted, it was a lie. A cover story for a career spent in the shadows, at the very tip of the spear. The debriefing room back at Coronado was cold and silent. Captain Rostova sat at the head of the long table, her face a Yuichi mask of controlled fury. The loss of a multi-million-dollar RHIB and the presumed deaths of 7 operators from the second boat, they had since been found, clinging to debris, alive but in bad shape, a testament to their own training, was a disaster. A career-ending disaster. Lieutenant Corrigan, his head bandaged, gave his report in a low, humbled voice. He recounted the storm, his injury, the complete breakdown of command and control. Then he looked directly at Rostova. "Captain," he said, his voice clear and steady, "the only reason anyone on my boat is alive is Chief Petty Officer Sharma. She took command. She stabilized the wounded, she rigged a sea anchor out of scrap, she managed our resources, and she formulated the rescue plan. She saved our lives, all of us." One by one, the other survivors from the boat echoed his report. Gant, Sandoval, Jensen. They spoke in the clipped, factual manner of professional soldiers. No hyperbole. Just the facts. And the facts all pointed to one person. Rostova listened, her expression unreadable. When they were finished, she dismissed them, leaving only Anya in the room. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words. Rostova stared at Anya, truly seeing her for the first time, not as an aging clerk, but as the formidable presence the men had described. Finally, Rostova turned to her computer terminal. She typed in her command-level credentials, then entered Anya's service number. A standard personnel file appeared. She typed another series of codes, an override sequence she was only supposed to use in the gravest extreme. The screen flickered, and a new file replaced the old one. It was almost entirely black, block after block of redacted text, but a few words were visible. Commendation medals with a V for valor, mission code names that Rostova had only ever heard of in classified threat assessments: Eagle Claw 2, Desert Viper, Silent Hammer. And at the top, under designation, was a single stark entry: Special Projects Directorate, Field Logistics Analyst, Tier 1. And below it, a call sign, Kali. Rostova read for a full 5 minutes, her composure slowly cracking. The anomaly in her perfectly ordered world was not an anomaly at all. It was a legend hiding in plain sight. Anya hadn't been sent to Coronado to be put out to pasture. She had come here because after 30 years of operating in the shadows, she had finally requested a post where she could serve out her last years in the light, training the next generation, passing on the knowledge she had bled for. Rostova slowly closed the file. She looked up at Anya, and for the first time, the captain's eyes held no condescension, no skepticism. They held a profound, staggering respect. "Why?" Rostova asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why the CIF? Why let them treat you like that?" "The gear needs to work, Captain," Anya said simply. "The men need to trust the gear. The best way to ensure that is to check it myself. My place is where the mission begins, with the rope, the rebreather, and the rifle. Always has been." There was nothing else to say. No apology could suffice. Rostova stood up, walked around her desk, and stood before the chief. She didn't offer a handshake. She rendered a slow, perfect salute. An honor guard salute. A salute from a commanding officer to a warrior who had earned more respect than any medal could possibly convey. Anya returned it, her movements as crisp and economical as ever. The next day, Anya Sharma walked into the mess hall for lunch. The room didn't fall completely silent this time, but a change was palpable. A current of awareness flowed through the space. Seaman Miller was there, sitting alone, staring intently at his tray of food. He looked smaller, diminished. As Anya passed his table, he flinched, but didn't dare look up. Anya got her food and sat at her usual table in the corner. Before she could even pick up her fork, Axe was there. He placed a steaming black coffee on her table, just the way she liked it. He didn't say a word about the storm, about the rescue, about the name Gant had told him. He didn't have to. He just looked at her, his eyes conveying a universe of gratitude and respect, and gave his short, sharp nod. "Chief?" Across the room, at every table where a SEAL sat, a man would catch her eye, and a nod would follow. It was a silent, rolling salute, a quiet acknowledgement from the tribe to one of its most revered and secret elders. Anya picked up the coffee, the warmth spreading through her fingers. She took a sip, nodded back at Axe, and then, as always, she calmly began to eat her lunch. Her work wasn't done. That evening, long after the base had settled into its nighttime rhythm, the lights were still on in the cavernous CIF. Anya stood at a workbench, a single incandescent bulb hanging over her head, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The smell of oil and damp neoprene hung in the air. On the table in front of her was the gear recovered from the wrecked RHIB. It was a mangled, salt-encrusted mess. She worked in silence, her movements methodical, almost ritualistic. She disassembled a rifle that had been submerged for 12 hours, her expert hands cleaning away the corrosive salt, checking the action, oiling the components with a practiced efficiency. She moved onto a climbing harness, testing the integrity of every stitch, discarding a buckle that showed the slightest sign of stress corrosion. This was her true debrief. Reading the story of the storm in the language of broken equipment, learning its lessons from the frayed ropes and the cracked casings. The main door to the warehouse slid open, the sound echoing in the vast space. Captain Rostova walked in, her footsteps unnaturally loud on the silent floor. She was out of uniform, wearing a simple naval sweatshirt and trousers. She stopped a few feet from the workbench, watching Anya work. Anya didn't stop. She continued to meticulously reassemble the rifle, her focus absolute. "The preliminary accident report is on my desk," Rostova said, her voice quiet. "It cites catastrophic equipment failure of the comms package and an unforecasted weather event. It recommends a full review of our offshore forecasting models." Anya slid the bolt back into the rifle. It seated with a satisfying, solid clack. "The models are fine. The people reading them don't spend enough time on the water. They trust the screen more than the sky." "I see that now," Rostova said. She took a step closer. "I've made a change to your assignment, Chief. Effective immediately. You're no longer assigned to the CIF. I'm creating a new billet for you. Operational Readiness Advisor for NavSpec Warcom. You'll answer directly to me. Your job will be to break things, to find the flaws in our equipment, our tactics, our plans, before the enemy does. You'll have full authority to requisition any gear, run any test, and advise any team. Your expertise is required." Anya finished her work on the rifle. She wiped it down with a clean cloth, her movements gentle, respectful. She finally looked up, her pale eyes meeting the captain's in the dim light. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, just a quiet acceptance. This was the work she had always done, only now she would no longer have to do it from the shadows. She gave a single, slow nod. "Understood, Captain." Rostova nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them. She turned and walked away, her footsteps receding into the cavernous dark. Anya Sharma, the woman they called Kali, turned back to her bench. She picked up a frayed rope, its fibers telling a story of strain and survival. Outside, the first light of a new day was beginning to touch the horizon, but here in the quiet solitude of the warehouse, her watch had not ended. It was just beginning.